Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we plunge into stacks of sources to unearth surprising facts and fresh insights. Today, we're exploring a really compelling collection of interviews and discussions from Graham Hancock. He's the New York Times bestselling author, focus of that Netflix series, Ancient Apocalypse. And he's given us material that, well, it definitely challenges conventional views of ancient history.
It really does. These sources offer a fascinating invitation to question assumptions we've held for a long time about humanity's past. Our mission today really is to extract the most important nuggets from all this rich material. We'll be delving into, the possibility of a lost civilization, a global cataclysm, maybe even technologies we can barely fathom. But it's important we keep a neutral perspective on the content itself. You'll hear different viewpoints for sure. But our role is just to present the information impartially.
Right. So let's unpack this deep dive. We're looking at things like mapping the world long before us and other Hancock discussions. Everything from ancient pyramids and lost maps to cosmic impacts and even the origins of consciousness. We'll also explore how ancient myths, the ones often dismissed as just folklore, how they might actually be historical records encoding scientific knowledge far beyond what we thought possible back then. Okay, so Hancock talks about three main camps when it comes to ancient civilizations. You've got those who just deny any lost civilization ever existed, then those who accept one existed but deny it had any advanced technology, and finally those who accept both the civilization and the advanced tech. He puts himself sort of outside these, focusing on what advanced even means, suggesting an Ice Age culture, maybe shamanistic, went quite a bit further.
And that immediately raises a big question, doesn't it? If such a civilization existed, why don't we see, more obvious evidence everywhere? Hancock's idea here is that we're a species with amnesia, that we've essentially forgotten our roots because of some huge global cataclysm. If you connect that to the bigger picture, well, it suggests our whole understanding of history might be seriously incomplete, that there are just vast areas we haven't investigated properly. Okay, before we even get to the cataclysm idea, how does he actually build the case that this civilization might have existed in the first place? What's the foundation? Well, he points to patterns, consistent patterns in archaeological anomalies, things that don't quite fit the standard timeline, and also in global myths, stories from all around the world. He argues these patterns can really only be explained by some kind of shared, highly developed predecessor culture, one that predates, what we normally think of as the dawn of history. That's the basic premise, and then the cataclysm hypothesis comes in to explain why it all disappeared, why we forgot.
Right, the cataclysm. That seems absolutely central to his argument, doesn't it? The Younger Dryas, this is where a lot of the evidence he presents seems to converge. Can you walk us through that period? What do the sources suggest happened?
Okay, the Younger Dryas. It was this really strange, sudden period of climate reversal. We're talking between about 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. It kicked off with a massive plunge in global temperatures, back down to Ice Age cold. Really sudden. And then it ended just as abruptly, with temperatures soaring and the ice caps collapsing. And the key theory discussed here is the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. It's supported by, I think, over 60 scientists now. They propose that multiple fragments of a giant comet slammed into the North American ice cap around 12,800 years ago.
A comet impact. What's the actual, physical evidence they point to for something that dramatic?
Yeah, it's pretty compelling stuff. The sources talk about finding these impact proxies, like markers, in a specific geological layer called the black mat. It's this dark band of sediment you find in many places around the world dated to that time. And in that layer, they find things like nanodiamonds, shocked quartz, which is quartz melted at over 2,200 degrees Celsius, also carbon microspheres, soot, similar evidence actually to what they found for the dinosaur extinction event. The idea is these impacts would have caused just unimaginable floods, huge tidal waves, and released enormous amounts of icy meltwater into the oceans, which would disrupt currents like the Gulf Stream, causing that global cooling.
The floods, the scale described, sounds just staggering. What kind of physical evidence is left on the ground from floods that big?
This is where Randall Carlson's work comes in, which Hancock features quite a bit. Carlson describes mega-scale flood flows, particularly in North America. I mean, we're talking tsunami-like waves, maybe over 1,000 feet deep, way beyond any normal river flood. He points to evidence like the channeled scablands in eastern Washington state, just massive erosion features, or giant potholes, there's one mentioned in Minnesota, like 10 feet wide and 60 feet deep, carved into bedrock. And huge erosion across the American Southwest, too. This kind of evidence, he argues, just doesn't fit with slow, gradual explanations. It points to a sudden, violent force. Take Lake Missoula, for instance. The debate there used to be about whether it caused one huge flood or lots of smaller ones. Hancock and Carlson leaned towards a much, much larger, possibly singular event triggered by those younger Dryas impacts.
And presumably events like that would have had a devastating effect on life at the time.
Oh, absolutely. Catastrophic. The Younger Dryas period lines up directly with mass extinctions of the megafauna, the giant animals, globally, really. But in North America, something like 75% of the large mammal species just vanished. We're talking mastodons, mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant sloths. Gone. This whole period, about 1,200 years of chaos, would have had profound consequences for any human civilizations around at the time. It could have easily wiped most of them out. It's a chilling thought, like you said, an entire chapter of human history potentially erased.
It really makes you wonder what echoes might still be around. So if this cataclysm wiped out an advanced civilization, what traces might have survived? The sources point to some incredible structures that seem, well, out of place. Let's start with Giza. The Sphinx, the pyramids.
Right, the Giza Plateau is absolutely central. Take the Sphinx. Conventionally, Egyptologists date it to about 4,500 years ago, attributing it to Pharaoh Khafre. But Robert Schoch, a geologist, and others argue the erosion patterns on the Sphinx's body aren't from wind and sand. They argue it's classic precipitation-induced erosion from thousands of years of heavy rainfall. Rainfall Egypt hasn't seen since long before Khafre's time, possibly aligning with the wetter period before or during the Younger Dryas. This suggests the Sphinx could be much older, maybe over 12,000 years old. There's also the idea the original statue was a lion and the head was later recarved into a pharaoh's likeness, which could explain why the head seems kind of disproportionately small for the body. Plus, its gaze. It looks due east, right at the rising sun on the spring equinox. And calculation-wise, that alignment would have pointed directly at the constellation Leo back around 10,500 BC, potentially supporting that older date.
Okay, the Sphinx's age is a huge question mark, but the Great Pyramid itself, the construction is just mind-boggling, isn't it? How do the sources explain that?
Well, the standard explanation from Egyptology is that it was built for Pharaoh Khufu over maybe just 23 years. This is based largely on a single quarry mark, a cartouche with Khufu's name, found in one of the relieving chambers above the king's chamber. Chambers that the explorer Howard Vyse actually dynamited his way into, which is controversial in itself. But engineers, and Hancock too, question if building something that massive, that precise, almost perfectly aligned north-south, if that was even possible in just 23 years, using known ancient Egyptian tools. We're talking about moving millions of massive blocks, including 70-ton granite beams lifted over 350 feet up for the king's chamber. So alternative ideas include maybe it was a much longer, multi-generational project, just finished by Khufu, or even, and this is where it gets really speculative, some kind of lost, extraordinary technology we don't understand, maybe manipulating matter with sound, things like that.
And even with what we can see, there are still parts of the pyramid that are total mysteries, like those shafts.
Exactly. The Great Pyramid definitely holds secrets, those narrow shafts, yeah. One goes up from the Queen's chamber. A robot explored it back in the 90s, found what looked like a small door blocking the way. Then a later robot drilled a tiny hole through it, revealed a little cavity, and then another blocking stone or door behind that, still unexplored. And the entrance most tourists use today, that's called Mamun's Hole. It was actually a tunnel forced into the pyramid by Caliph al-Mamun in the 9th century AD because the original entrance, higher up, was hidden and lost behind the outer casing stones.
Fascinating. Okay, moving beyond Egypt, what other sites did the sources bring up that challenge the standard timeline?
Oh, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey is huge. It's presented as a major game changer because it's dated to 11,600 years ago. That makes it like 5,000 years older than Stonehenge or the supposed earliest megalithic sites anywhere else. And it's incredibly sophisticated. Huge T-shaped pillars, some weighing 20 tons, intricately carved, astronomically aligned, and it was built, supposedly, by hunter-gatherers, which completely messes with the standard theory that you need agriculture before you get monumental architecture. What's also really strange is that after about 1,000 years of use, the entire site was deliberately buried, carefully filled in. Why? Hancock suggests maybe it was like a time capsule or a memorial to a lost world, or perhaps it represents a sort of restarting of civilization, maybe a technology transfer from survivors of that earlier lost culture.
And are there other examples pointing to potentially lost technologies, things that just don't seem to fit?
Yes, quite a few mentioned. For instance, at Baalbek in Lebanon, you have the Trilithon, 3 colossal stone blocks, each around 900 tons, and they're sitting in a retaining wall about 25 feet off the ground. How the Romans, who built the temples on top later, could have moved and positioned those is a huge mystery. They seem much older. Then back in Egypt, you have thousands, over 30,000 apparently, of these incredibly finely carved stone vessels, found in tombs predating the pharaohs, made from super hard stone like diorite, quartz crystal. And they have these impossible shapes, like narrow necks that flare out inside. How do you carve that from solid, hard stone with simple tools? Even way back, there's a Denisovan bracelet from Siberia, dated maybe 40,000 to 70,000 years old. It's made of green stone and shows signs of being drilled with a high-speed, stable tool, a real out-of-place technology for that time. And then there's the underwater stuff, possible submerged structures, like a U-shaped formation in the Sicily Channel, the Yonaguni Monument off Japan, building blocks found near Alexandria. These are presented as potential evidence of coastal sites drowned by the sea level rise after the Ice Age. Oh, and Easter Island, the Moai statues, usually dated to the last 700, 800 years. But some have been excavated and found buried like 30 feet deep in sediment, which suggests they might be much, much older.
Okay, so all these anomalies in different places. Does this suggest maybe a globally connected culture back then? What about evidence for seafaring or shared knowledge?
That's definitely part of the argument. The sources highlight these strange ancient maps. The Piri Race map is the most famous one. It supposedly shows parts of the coast of Antarctica, but free of ice, as it might have looked during the last ice age. This was drawn in 1513, centuries before Antarctica was officially discovered in 1819. And they contrast it with, say, a Pinkerton map from 1818, which doesn't show Antarctica, even though exploration was more advanced then. The implication is that the Piri Reis map used much older source maps, originating from a sophisticated global seafaring culture, one with technology maybe equivalent to ours at the end of the 18th century, but existing thousands of years earlier.
So the idea is that long-distance sea travel wasn't just something that developed later in historical times.
According to Hancock's view, absolutely not. He points out that humans reached Australia 50,000 or 60,000 years ago, and Cyprus by 14,000 years ago. Both required significant open water voyages, likely with substantial populations, not just a few people on a raft. This implies pretty sophisticated boats and navigation skills way back in the Ice Age. You also see shared cultural ideas popping up in weirdly distant places, like the man between two felines motif. You find variations of that imagery in ancient Egypt, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, even the Indus Valley, or Pueblo Bonito in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, built about 1,000 years ago. It has these distinctive T-shaped doorways. Very similar doorways are found much further south in Mesoamerican sites, suggesting links we don't fully understand.
It's fascinating. Beyond the physical evidence, the sources talk about knowledge being preserved in other ways, like through myths, maybe even consciousness itself. What about all those flood myths?
Yeah, the flood myths are a big piece. There are apparently over 200 of them, found in cultures all across the globe. From the Sumerian Epic of Gilgamesh, which is clearly the basis for the Noah story, to traditions among the Aztecs in Mexico, the Toba people in South America, the Inuit in the Arctic. And these stories often share core elements. A global catastrophe, usually involving massive floods, but sometimes fire from the sky, earthquakes too. Almost everyone gets wiped out, but a small remnant survives, often warned beforehand, maybe in a boat, to preserve life or knowledge. What's really striking is Plato's account of Atlantis. He explicitly dates its destruction to 9,000 years before his time, which puts it around 9,600 BC. And Hancock emphasizes that this date coincides exactly with hard geological evidence for something called meltwater pulse 1b, which was a period of incredibly rapid, massive sea level rise around 11,600 years ago, right at the end of the Younger Dryas, driven by melting ice sheets.
And these myths aren't just seen as stories of disaster, but possibly containing actual scientific information.
That's the argument, yes. Particularly the concept of the precession of the equinoxes. That's the slow wobble of the Earth's axis that completes a cycle every roughly 25,920 years. It causes the constellations to slowly shift position over centuries. Officially, it was discovered by the Greek astronomer Hipparchus around 127 BC. But some authors, like Santillana and von Dayschend in their book Hamlet's Mill, argue this knowledge is way older, encoded in myths worldwide. They suggest it comes from an almost unbelievable ancestor civilization. You see these specific numbers derived from precession, like 72, 108, 43,200, popping up again and again in myths and sacred texts. In the Indian Rig Veda and Norse mythology, the Egyptian Osiris story, and this ties back to Giza too. The layout of the pyramids and the Sphinx is argued to be a kind of map of the sky. Specifically, how the sky looked around 10,500 BC, with the Sphinx as Leo gazing at its celestial counterpart and Orion's belt aligning perfectly with the three main pyramids, like a giant date stamp marking that ancient time.
That's a mind-bending idea. And this knowledge, maybe even linked to altered states of consciousness, how does that fit in?
Hancock definitely explores this. He suggests that fundamentally, all human cultures probably emerged from shamanism. and that perhaps this lost civilization didn't just discard shamanism, but maybe refined it, integrated its essence into their way of life, potentially cultivating powers of the human mind that our modern society tends to dismiss or pathologize. He talks quite openly about psychedelics, ayahuasca from the Amazon, DMT, Amanita muscaria mushrooms, not just for, spiritual experiences, but potentially as a kind of molecular technology for investigating reality itself. He argues that by demonizing these substances, our society is really doing itself a disservice, and that many indigenous cultures have deeply studied encounters with what they perceive as discarnate intelligences, non-physical entities accessed via these states. It poses a really profound question. What if our society sort of recovers its sanity, as he puts it, and recognizes these forgotten paths to understanding might hold real value?
Okay, it's undeniable that these ideas are, well, pretty far outside mainstream archaeology. What are the main friction points Hancock highlights? How does he describe the reaction from academia?
Yeah, he's quite critical. He asserts that what he calls big archaeology maintains a strong hold over the public notion of the past, mainly through the education system, and that it actively restricts, even censors, alternative viewpoints. He gives examples where he feels his work has been repeatedly, deliberately, and in a calculated way misrepresented,
Yeah.
including accusations of promoting racism or white supremacism, which he strongly denies, arguing it's an ad hominem tactic to shut down debate. He describes a pattern where archaeologists might dismiss evidence that doesn't fit the standard model, like the inventory stela in Egypt, which seems to suggest the Sphinx and maybe even the Great Pyramid already existed before Khufu, or those very old 130,000-year-old mastodon bones found in San Diego that show potential signs of human activity.
So why the resistance? From his perspective, what's driving that reluctance to even seriously investigate these older possibilities?
He acknowledges that some archaeologists genuinely believe the mainstream view is correct, based on their interpretation of the evidence. But he also suggests there's a systemic reluctance, almost a dogma, against looking for significant evidence older than, say, 13,000 or 14,000 years ago, sometimes citing lack of funds or the destructive nature of excavation as reasons not to dig deeper at certain sites. But he argues that not looking, deliberately avoiding those deeper layers, is fundamentally a failure of science. The core idea that a sophisticated civilization could have existed and then been almost completely taken out of the story by a global cataclysm is deeply revolutionary. It challenges the whole narrative of humanity being on this smooth, linear path of progress, maybe suggesting we're here accidentally, in a way. He perceives the more aggressive academic attacks not as scientific debate, but as attempts to crush and destroy other people, to ridicule and diminish their life's work. And he believes this ultimately hinders genuine inquiry into our potentially forgotten past.
Wow. We have covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. From the geological puzzles of the Younger Dryas, the amazing alignments of ancient sites to, well, the role of consciousness itself. We've really explored this compelling idea that maybe a huge chunk of our history is still hidden, buried by catastrophe, or perhaps just dismissed by current dogma.
It absolutely encourages you to think critically, doesn't it? To question the assumptions we often take for granted about the past. The collection of evidence and arguments presented by Graham Hancock and his colleagues, well, it definitely pushes the boundaries of what we thought ancient humans were capable of.
So what does all this mean for you, listening right now? If the story of human civilization is potentially far older, far more complex, maybe more cyclical than we usually think, what other lost chapters might still be out there waiting to be rediscovered? It really leaves you with a powerful thought. Maybe our own civilization, for all its incredible technology, could actually benefit from remembering what our distant ancestors might have known about resilience, about survival, and perhaps about connecting with the wider universe in ways we've forgotten.